Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chat some interesting figures and leading lights in the crazy industry we're in of writing and self-publishing. And for the first time in 2024, we have a brand new guest, Kimboo York, who is an author, a librarian, a text technology historian, and a former IT project manager, all four important skills that assemble together. Kimboo, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's so good to be here with y'all today. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we are delighted to have you here. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thank you, Roland, and thank you, Kimboo, for coming on today. It's funny, you said the first time in 2024, I was just looking at the schedule. So I guess we did put out a podcast that had somebody on it, but we recorded that, I guess, last year. So this is our first guest that we're recording with this year, because last week it was just you and I chatting about stuff. So
I'm still getting used to this year.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I know, and I'm gonna keep saying 2023 all the time, I'm sure. I've already said it once in my regular life. No, it's 2024.
I'm not quite sure if I'm over the 90s being over.
Sadly, but true.
Okay, so what we wanted to talk to you about this week is you've written a book about creating serials.
Yes.
You wrote Become an Unstoppable Storyteller, How to Craft Compelling Serials. And that is something that we often talk about the importance of, Roland and I, because, as an author, one of the easiest ways to sort of get, that recurring revenue and creating the fans that keep coming back is when you have a serial, right? And you have a set of books and people want to come back and read the next one and the next one, depending on your genre, it's not always a lot of people in romance, they write standalone serials, right? Where the couples are sort of interconnected, the friends in book one become the lovers of book two and this and that, right? And which is another, way to go, right? Because then everyone can come in at any point. But then there's the serialization where it's like, you need to read them in order, and sometimes they end on a cliffhanger, and which everybody kind of grumbles about, but they still come back for more, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote this book and your experience with serials, and we'll sort of jump into it.
I think I've always been somebody who loves long-running stories. Even as a child, I'm old enough, I'm dating myself a little bit, to have watched the first Star Wars: A New Hope in theaters when it was released. And the idea that it would be a continuing story really appealed to me. All my favorite books as kids were book series, The Black Stallion. And then, of course, I went into Star Trek, and then everything was, there's story over. As I became a writer, what I realized is that I love to write these long-running stories. Now, I got into professional publishing as a professionally published author through romance novels, which tend to be very structured and have very set beats, always have a happy ending. I don't have any problem with that as a reader, but as a writer, I felt very restricted. And then in about 2015, I took on the NaNoWriMo challenge and started writing a book called Wolves of Harmony Heights, and it has since been published. And it was such a difficult book to end. And I know we always complain about writing endings, but for me, it was like I was pushing back against the urge to keep the story going. And I realized it was almost 200,000 words at that point. I was like, no, it's got to end. It's just got to end. And I had no place to cut it into 2 or 3 books. It just had a very unique structure to it. And I just couldn't figure out what it was doing. And since it was kind of a vanity project anyway, I wasn't too worried about it. I just kind of threw it out into the world. Well, fast forward to probably 2022, 2023, and subscription models have started coming into much more prominence in the author community. Of course, subscription models been around for a long time, and serialized fiction, in my opinion, is one of the oldest forms of storytelling. Back to when it was oral storytelling, 1001 Nights, tell a little bit of a story, and then tomorrow you get the next section. Television shows, we're all very familiar with serialized storytelling, but I think it's coming into a renaissance for authors. And as I looked at that and I started realizing that's what I wanted to go into, I kind of turned back and looked to Wolves of Harmony Heights, and I realized what I had actually done with that book, novel, so-called, was start a serial, which I personally differentiate a serial from a novel. Like, you can have a series of novels, kind of what you were talking about with the romance genre, like one novel focuses on this couple, the other novel focuses on this couple, but they're all connected and it's a series. A serial is a very long running story about a character or a group of characters. I think everybody right now is probably familiar with One Piece, which started as manga and then, became an animated anime and is now live action. It's just, but I believe the anime is already up to over 1,000 episodes.
My kids have informed me of that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. It's a fabulous story, and it's very long running. In my book, I give examples of plenty other stories, both Asian, Japanese, some Chinese, and Western stories that I think fit that model. But I think it's becoming a very important model for not all authors. Like, it's not required to do a subscription with serials. You can serialize anything. You could serialize a novel. You could serialize a short story. You could serialize an epic poem. Like, I don't care what you serialize. You could use that for a subscription model if you want. But my focus is on these really long running stories and how you can structure them so they don't run out of steam or fall apart, which is usually what tends to happen if you don't have an eye on what I call the long story arc, the long structure. Is that a very long answer to your very short question?
No, it's a great answer. So you're actually talking more about, sort of the Radish model of serialization of stories into smaller chunks, as opposed to, like the Game of Thrones series, which also is a serial in the sense that, it's a continuing story. It continues their same characters, right? They're not standalone.
I think it could go either way. I think it depends. Like, I think you're right. I think Game of Thrones is a serial, what I would define as a serial, but it's being published as a series of novels. So there's some gray area here. That's a totally valid way to do it. A lot of trilogies are, in my opinion, actually serials. My famous example being the Lord of the Rings trilogy. In my mind, that is just one long serial. One of my favorite books series ever is Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien.
Oh, good choice.
Oh man, it's not something you can reread every year, but every few years I go through that whole series. I love it so much. That's definitely a serial. But obviously, because of the technology at the time when it was released, they were released as individual books. So there's just a lot of wiggle room in how an author wants to do it, which I think is the advantage of doing it these days, because we have the technology. We can self-publish. We can try to get a traditional contract. We can do Radish, Ream, Wattpad, Royal Road, Inkit, like so many out there these days, or even self-hosted on WordPress. A lot of authors in the early 2000s were doing that. Were serializing their stories on self-hosted platforms. So there's just so many ways to do it. The question is, what do you want to write? Are you like me, big on world building, big on long story arcs that tell this massive story about these characters going on these big adventures? Are you somebody who likes to keep things very discreet and you just want to like cozy mysteries, like you've got the mystery of the week or mystery of the book with the same characters? There's two very different things. Some overlap, but it just depends on what you want to do as a writer. I just want to open everybody's eyes to the possibility of what you can do with a serial long-running story.
That sort of puts me in the head frame of Hardy Boys, which I read as
another good
right?
choice.
And so that idea of it's always a different mystery, but it's the same brothers always doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew are kind of the cozy mysteries for kids type of thing, because that's really what it was. It was lots of fun. But again, it depends on what you want to do as an author, how you want to serialize a story and what kind of story you're trying to serialize. That makes sense.
Right. And what is your preferred way of serialization? What route did you go with your book?
Well, Wolves of Harmony Heights, I did end up publishing as a novel, and I'm not going to go back and rewrite it or try to do anything different with it. I'm moving onto other projects now, but those projects I am actually posting on Ream, which is a new serialization platform. It's heavy on the romance right now, but the founders are trying to expand it to other genres like thriller and horror, and I know a couple of historical fiction authors who are on there. And so my work nowadays is more fantasy focused. So I'm going to be publishing my new one, Dragon's Grail. The first installment is coming out later this month. And I'm really excited about getting that one rolling. That's going to be a long one. So that's what I'm using right now. Now, what I also do is I post free chapters, which are older chapters that have been out for a while, on platforms like Royal Road, Substack, Inkit, Wattpad, just to try to attract readers who might be interested in the story. So there's lots of different levels to how it can work.
Now, you mentioned, I mean, one of the things that I think must be a challenge about serials is, where does it go to? Where is the destination? You mentioned with the 3-book arc, that's great because that does have a destination. But then I guess One Piece, I mean, that's still just, I don't claim to know much about it, but it's still been going on for 1,000 episodes. Where is it leading to? Days of Our Lives, where is it leading to?
Well, for instance, Days of Our Lives, is a classic soap opera, which is designed to go on infinitely, right? So it's never going anywhere. One Piece does have a ending, and that is when they find the One Piece. They are actually on a search for a specific thing. And the author of it has stated that they will eventually find this thing. They're just going on a lot of adventures first. So there is a goal there. The goal with Lord of the Rings, for instance, was to get the ring destroyed, get it to Mordor, throw it into the volcano and destroy it. So I think if you're going to be thinking about a long-running serial or a long-running story, you need that end goal in mind. You need the thing that your people are moving towards, or your characters are moving towards. In my book, I talk about the long arc. And the whole point of my book, actually, there's a free spreadsheet that basically encapsulates a lot of principles in the book that I have on Google Sheets, and I can share that link with you so you can share it with your listeners. That kind of shows what I'm talking about, in the sense that you can take, say, the hero's journey, very typical, and use that as your long story arc. And it is the one that's going to go all the way from the start of the serial, to 1,000,000 words later, which some go that long, to the end. But to keep readers hooked, you need these shorter story arcs. And usually the shorter story arcs are a little bit simpler. They might be just a simple 3-act structure. It might be a 6-act structure or something like that. And they're the bits and pieces of the story that keep people hanging on. Think of a television serial that has a cliffhanger at the end of the season, right? So that season is kind of the short story arc, the shorter arc. And then they have the cliffhanger, and you've got the big arc over on top of it. They still haven't found the thing. They haven't still gotten to the place. But then you start another season. You resolve that cliffhanger, and then you keep repeating that type of structure over time, and it will keep people engaged with the story over the span of a long, long time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's a daunting sort of process for a lot of people. I'm sure to
Okay, but it's not.
Right?
It's not. So like it's what you want is that thing that they want. Like my story, Dragon's Grail. That's not spoilers for me to tell you that the main focus of the characters is to get this baby dragon across a continent. Like, that's it. They have to get this baby dragon across the continent back to its mommy. That is their whole goal. Along the way, they're going to have so many adventures, and they're going to meet so many different other characters, and there's going to be tragedy, and there's going to be a love story. So you may think it's daunting, but if you think of that thing, if you think of that goal of your characters, then everything in between is just fun stuff.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about like sort of the plotting out of everything. So are
Hmm.
you, would you characterize yourself then more as a plotter, or?
I am absolutely 100% a pantser, which is
Okay.
so ironic. But I am the kind of pants, like this kind of goes into, I actually have another book coming out called By the Seat of Your Pants, Secrets of Discovery Writing. That's coming out in less than a month. And it talks about a lot of the things, types of techniques that pantsers and discovery writers can use. And one of them is that we write towards a beat, which is what got me into the beats of serial storytelling, because I like the freedom of creating on the go. My curiosity drives my creativity. So I need to have that unknown that I'm working towards. But I do need some structure. And so I just use very basic beats to say, well, there needs to be, you know, if you're writing a romance, just using that, there needs to be a meet cute. There needs to be a long, dark night of the soul. I don't necessarily plan what those things are going to be when I start the story, but I have the beat structure in place. And as I said about the Google worksheet, if you look at that, you will see that I do have all of those beats spaced out, both for what I call the shorter story arcs, what I call the bridging arcs, and then the long story arcs. And it's all very visual, which is why I created the spreadsheet, because it can get complicated fast.
So you plot out sort of all those things, but then you pants out the details as you go.
Right, exactly. You know, I just know that they need to get the dragon to the mommy. I know that there's going to be a certain character arc for the main character. I know that there are certain beats that I want to, like, I believe for the shorter story arcs, I'm using Save the Cat model, a version of, it's not exactly Save the Cat, but it's a form of Save the Cat for television. And I'm using that for the shorter arcs. And that really helps me because that just keeps me on task. But I don't really know. Like, I have one right now that's called the Pirate's Witch. And I don't know who the Pirate Witch is. I don't know where they meet her. I don't know how they meet her, but I know there's going to be an inciting incident involving her and, I guess, a pirate ship. Like, I know that much. But that's
so
it.
You'll start writing the serial and publishing it without knowing that information.
Yeah.
So when you create these spreadsheets, they're not fully fleshed out necessarily.
Mm-mm.
You could sort of continue to build on them as you go.
Yep, exactly.
Right. So what are the skills that an author needs to be able to do this, I guess?
Well, you get into all sorts of skills, and what skills does an author need to write anything, right? Well, you need to have
Right. But I think you need a different mindset, sometimes for different kinds of writing and different styles of writing, right?
Definitely. And I think for if you're going to be getting into writing a serial, what you want to do is you want to think about how long can you commit to those characters in that story. It's not about so much what's your skill set at outlining or how good are you at world building. You should have a pretty good world building skill set, but you should just know, like we used One Piece for an example, which I think started in almost 20 years ago. Berserker is another manga that started in the late 80s and the early 90s, is still ongoing. If you want to really commit, if you have a set of characters or a plot that you really want to commit to for multiple years, and you love it, and you've got an idea of what their ultimate goal is going to be, then that's kind of the mindset you're going to need going into a serial. If you don't have that, if you don't want to do that, then I suggest stepping back and look at novel series, or, where they're kind of like we were talking about earlier, or just standalone novels. But a serial does require a certain amount of dedication. And so in that sense, I say, you got to love them. You got to love the characters. You've got to love the setup. You've got to love the world that you're going to be writing in, because you're going to be there for a few years. Like, I think Dragon's Grail, at the very least, is going to be 300,000 words. And it's just knowing what I know about how I want to get them where they're going. And that's going to take me at least 2 years. Writing on a regular basis, almost every day, several times a week, writing on this particular story with those particular characters. And that's a heck of an investment.
And so, one of the challenges too, I experimented with the Radish model a couple of years back. I wrote a series about it on the blog and in that sense, I took an existing novel that I sold years ago, and I sort of broke it up into pieces and sold it that way, right? And I know that, you know, some of the for the reader, some of the reluctance to get involved in a serial sometimes would be the idea that what if the author abandons it before it's even finished? And so, you know, that's a separate issue, kind of like, you know, it's you can do what I do with TV series now, is I wait till it's done before I even start.
Right.
But I guess, you know, if you're writing from scratch as a serial in the way that you're doing it, right? I guess one of the challenges is every time you write a new piece and publish it, that's now locked in. And you can't go back, I assume, you can't go back and start editing those pieces. Like when you write a big novel, you can, at the end, you decide something comes to mind, I want to do that, you can go set it up in those earlier chapters. You can, you know, you have a new character, you have a new surprise, and you want to leave a few clues and some breadcrumbs. You can go back and do that, or you also have the editing process to catch inconsistencies and stuff like that, right? But with this, if you're writing, you know, chapter by chapter and publishing it, and now it's out there, you never have the ability to go back and change stuff. And I guess that is sort of you know, I guess a limitation or something that you kind of have to keep in mind when you're writing, in your planning, or in that sense. Or I don't know, how do you deal with that?
Well, I've got two answers for you, because this is something that comes up a lot. The first one is that very few people, so what I call that is au courant writing. That is where you're writing something, and before it's finished, you're putting it out into the world. And some authors do write on Monday and publish the chapter on Friday, especially in the romance industry where there's a lot of churn and a lot of demand. That I know writers who do that. I am not one of those writers. Yeah, I know, right? I'm like, I can't do that. Because I am a pantser, what I've found is that I have to get about 30,000 words, 30 to 50,000 words into a story before I really grasp what's going on. I have to do that kind of writing. I write into the story. And so once I do that, and I know the characters, and I've got a real good, you know, feel for what's going to happen, and I just really feel comfortable writing in that world, that's when I'll back up, look at the first few scenes, do some editing, and start posting them. I've already got this, you know, set amount that I'm already ahead. And so if I just keep working on the story, I'll always be able to have time to go back and do some editing on the ones that are starting to post. And I think you'll find with a lot of serial authors, people who are writing really long running stories, that's a lot more common. That's, you know, they will write out, either if they're going to serialize a novel, they'll write out half the novel, or they'll write out the majority of it, and then they'll go back and start serializing the pieces, which is why oftentimes you'll have serial writers using multiple projects at the same time, which is, as a pantser, I always have to have multiple projects at the same time. It's just the way my brain works. So that's one answer. It's not quite as scary if you look at it that way. It's like, oh, I've got a backlog. I can work on that backlog while I'm continuing to write forward. The second answer I would give you is, and Craig, I mean this with all my heart and with love in my heart, but it is not 1995, my friend. We can change things on the internet. and so what a lot of authors are doing when they post these chapters is they say, here is the rough draft. Here is the work in progress. I cannot guarantee that when the story is finished, this chapter will be the same as it is now. And readers are fine with that. Readers who enjoy the anticipation of being a part of a serial, as opposed to readers who want to wait until it's already done and in the can, those readers, they don't care. They just want the story. They're like, if this character's name changes, or this setting changes, or we get an extra chapter in between these two chapters to explain something, they're fine with that. And so it's been a shift for me as well. I point fingers at you, I'm pointing fingers at me, to realize that being able to kind of write in public is okay. readers are okay with that. My fans love my writing, and they're not going to get on my case because side character D went from being 15 years old to 40 years old down the road, and I go back and retcon that. Like, they'll be like, okay, that's fine. So that is a lot of what's going on in the serial community. You've got the backlog, so you're not always posting just right on the nail, and you've got the opportunity that down the road you can go back and fix things. And that's certainly true when people are taking their arcs of their serials and publishing them as books. That's the point where they usually give it to professional editors, sharpen things up a lot, and then they post it as a book, and they just let it be known that the serial is kind of a work in progress.
And so when you do that, can you do that on the platforms as well, like Ream or whatever, or is that only for people that are sort of publishing on their own in their own sort of space?
Oh no, Wattpad, Ream, Inkit, Royal Road, all of Radish, all of those platforms allow you to go in and edit chapters that already exist. Sometimes they'll mark that they've been edited, that they've been changed. Sometimes they won't. I always, because for me it's about community with your fans rather than just being a great writer, because I will never be a great writer. So I'm more about the community with the fans. It's being honest with them. As long as you're being honest with the fans, saying there may be changes down the road, then it's going to be fine. But all the platforms do allow you to go in and change things. It's no different than if you're self-published and you publish a book on Amazon, somebody finds a typo, you correct the file, and then you go republish the new file. People are kind of used to that these days. In fact, they expect it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that is something that people accept. I think, if I was reading a story, like personally, if I was reading a story like that, and then the author's making changes to it and at the beginning that I now have to reread for later things to make sense, that would annoy me. But
I don't think that's kind of where the backlog thing comes in. If you're
right.
not
that's
certain,
the way I would do it.
Yeah. If you as an author aren't certain that you're not, like, if I went and I published, well, I did actually. So I was being part of a writing challenge with a friend, and I had an idea and I started writing it. So I was posting like 250 to 500 words a day of this raw story. And I love it. I love the beginning of it, but I had to stop. I couldn't keep going once that month-long challenge was over, because I realized I'm going to be changing a lot of things about the story from this first part that I've already written. And so I haven't pulled it down, but I've just made it clear that once the story picks up again, there's going to be a lot of changes, because I have to write into it to know what I'm doing. So if you're a writer who's very used to being able to go back and retcon things once you've written to a certain point in the story, don't start sharing it until you've reached that point. Because if you change too much, readers will start getting a little grumpy with you. Changing minor things, changing names, changing settings, changing ages, I think readers will be a lot more amenable to that. But like, if you go in and add a third, main protagonist out of nowhere, then they're not. That's a different story. So don't do that.
I think changing names is confusing too, though.
I had the example of my first book in my series of books. There was a character who had a brother, and then when I got to book 9 in the series, I realized I'd written 8 books in which he was a single only child, and then I had a brother in the first book. So you go back, so I can see what it does seem. You have to like commit to these things.
I love it, because one of my this is an unpublished novel, but I did the same thing, but with a dog. I had a character who had this loyal dog, and I just kept writing and writing. And then one of my beta readers came back and said later in the story, was like, so what happened to the dog? Like, where did you do with the dog? And I was like, oh yeah, the dog. I got it.
The readers always catch those things.
They do.
We love our fictional dogs, though.
Oh, we do. I need to include more fictional dogs. So I'm a dog girl for sure.
So let's talk a bit about the compensation model, because that is something obviously that authors are going to be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody who hasn't played around with this model at all is probably curious about how it would compare to putting out a novel and just selling it that way. So what are you finding? Like, I know when I did with Radish, and it's been a couple of years, and I often honestly forget about, because they're still up there. I published a few of them, and I forget about it. And once in a while, I'll go check my dashboard and say, oh, it's made a bunch of money, right? But I'm not actively promoting it, which is another issue that I think we should probably talk about, which is one of the things that I sort of highlighted when I did that experiment was, it's not that easy. It wasn't that easy at that time to sort of like bring in those readers. It's like you almost have to advertise for the platform more than your book. And so then you're relying on the platform to sort of advertise to their readers, right? Unless you have your own following. But like, yeah, so how is the compensation model sort of done, and how do you find that, it sort of compares to writing a book?
So I'm going to completely remove from the conversation self-hosted solutions, because if you're hosting a subscription model using software on a WordPress platform that you own, it's all yours, right? So I just don't even want to go into that. It can be done. It's being done. Good luck to you on setting all that up. What we're seeing right now is a bit of a shift. So what you're talking about with Radish and Vela and platforms like that is people subscribed to the platform, and then you as an author got a cut of the proceeds, right? Kind of like just with Kindle Unlimited. You put your book up there. Kindle has a pot of money that they then partition out in pieces to all the authors who are on Kindle Unlimited. Radish and Vela particularly follow that model. So if you're going to be publishing there, you'll have a lot higher discovery, because they, as they are the platform making money, they have a vested interest in trying to promote more authors to more readers to get more subscriptions. So that's the trade-off there. Newer platforms like Ream are more focused, and Substack for that matter, are more focused on providing a hosting solution, you might say, where the author is getting the money directly and then paying the platform a percentage out of that. I think for Ream, it's 10% of your subscriptions. So if you have 100 people subscribed at $10, then a month, then you get that money, but a cut of that, 10% of it, which would be $100, math, but that would go to the platform itself. So there's really different ways to do it. And it's kind of in the middle of a transition period now as that's becoming more popular, especially with sites such as, I keep leaving out Patreon. A lot of authors are on Patreon. And again, that's a direct model, but it's really hard to read a book on Patreon. That's not set up for that, right? Like if you've ever followed an author on Patreon, it's a miserable experience aside from getting the updates in your email box. And Ream is trying to solve those types of problems, which I think is very important for reader engagement. Discoverability, though, continues to be the issue. It's how do readers find you? And that's always been a problem for authors. So it's a matter of, if you're buying advertising, where are you sending them? If you are on something like Vela or Radish, there's a little bit of internal discovery going on, which is probably why you're still getting a few bucks out of what you have up there. If you're doing something like Patreon, Ream, or Substack, then it's all on you to drive readers to the platform and subscribe. So it's just the difficulty level shift depending on what your priorities are and what you want to focus on. It's one reason why I've got an ongoing serialized novel right now, and I do post the free chapters on all the free platforms like Inkit and Wattpad, and I do free chapters on Substack so that readers can find me, and then they know that if they want early access or they want extras, they'll have to subscribe to me on Ream. So it's kind of a funnel. I don't think there's one way to do it at this point, because the technology keeps changing, keeps modifying, and giving us new opportunities on how to do it.
So I guess because you're advertising on those other platforms, those people are sort of already accustomed to reading it in that format. But otherwise, if you're going to advertise on a more traditional platform like Facebook, your barrier is also, on top of the just regular barriers, your barrier is going to be sort of like introducing people to this the way that this works and this sort of serialization model.
I think that's one big thing that's happening right now. I often joke that if you want to see where publishing is going in 5 years, look at fan fiction. If you want to see where publishing is going in 2 years, look at romance. And you see a lot of romance readers have migrated to these subscription platforms. And so a lot of people think, well, romance readers will do it. And they're, why would a thriller author, or why would a science fiction author, or why would a historical fiction author be on these platforms? But I think we're in a transition point where, because the accessibility of these platforms is becoming so much more common, people are getting used to the idea. They're kind of warming up to it. And in much the same way that we all went through in 2008 to 2010, where a lot of people were saying, well, the traditional publishers are never going to publish ebooks because who reads ebooks? Like, that's just not going to happen, right? That's for the self-publishing people. They might do maybe the bestseller will be an ebook, but it won't really be a thing. And now everybody is used to reading ebooks. Everybody has a preference. That's not to say that printed books don't exist anymore. Of course they do. But it's much more common and much more acceptable, and people are just very familiar with it. So we're seeing these transitions with audiobooks, and we're seeing these transitions with serialized stories. It's going to take a couple of years, I think, before it really just sinks in and anchors into the mass reader consciousness, but I think it's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't heard as much about it in sort of my sphere, but it does make a lot of sense, because I know a lot of romance authors, and other authors too, are, in the last few years, what I have noticed is they're sort of like, whereas when KDP came out and then everybody sort of jumped on the bandwagon of being exclusive, now the going wide thing is sort of gaining in popularity again. People are sort of pushing back against an Amazon-centric model. So now it makes sense then for them to now even push back further against a whole more structured online publishing model. So
I think, and I'm not a business, I'm not an MBA, like that's not my skill set. It's been a business, but I do think that what we're seeing nowadays, as you said, pushing back against the Amazon model, people are realizing they want to control the different buckets. So you've got direct sales, you've got subscriptions, you've got distribution through Amazon and Kobo and all the distributors, you've got library access, you've got, box sets and special Kickstarters, and many authors are starting to realize that it's about their own publishing ecosystem rather than throwing all of their money into KDP to be on KU and hope Amazon pays them 0.00043 cents per page read. So I think it's a matter of the paradigm is shifting a lot for a lot of self-publishers, but just because they're just tired of not being in control of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, taking back sort of, even we did an episode, I don't know, a couple months back, about the idea of authors publishing it on their own, selling direct. And that wasn't serialization, but it was, the creating your own website and building. And that way you're getting all of the money, you're keeping everyone in your ecosystem. And there are some authors doing that, and they're doing really well with it, right? But it's a bigger barrier to entry because of the sort of the technical side of it.
Yeah, definitely.
But then, it's sort of the similar thing here, where it's like you figure out, I guess, the model that works best for you and your skill set. So if you want to do serialization, you could go the Radish model, the Vela model, and then have everything sort of done for you, sort of. Or you can sort of go to the Ream model, which it gives you more control, gives you more money, but then you have to do more. You have to get that sort of subscriber base. Or you can go even further onto the sort of WordPress model, or whatever it is, where you're doing all this yourself, setting up a Patreon, or whatever, and getting people, funneling people that way. And then you're not paying, I guess. Well, you're still paying Patreon, so I guess there's no point in that.
But your point is taken. I mean, so I've been building websites since 1996, right? And so the thing about building websites has always been, fast, easy or cheap. And it's just like, well, pick two, because if you want to have full control, then you're going to be spending a lot of time learning the tech and dealing with the tech. If you just want to be able to put something up and have all that handled by somebody else, you're going to be paying for that. And that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, and I guess, so you have that skill set already, but you're still doing Ream. So
Yeah.
why are you not going, I guess, the sort of the model of doing everything yourself? Is that
Because there are only 24 hours in the day.
that ends?
I do have that skill set. If you look at my actual website, houseofyork.info, I built that. That's me. That's what I did. That took enough time. Having to build something like that and then do all the plugins and all the financial plugins and all the different ways to set it up so that it'd be a good reading experience, that I'd make some money off of it. All the financials would be easy to manage. I'm just like, dude, no, to me, it was a time versus effort thing, and I would rather be writing. So Ream for me, Ream was kind of that middle ground. It still keeps me a lot of control. I'm the one who gets paid, and then I pay the platform. That makes a lot more sense to me than publishing something and then hoping the platform pays me some money down the road. So that just was my comfort level. I did actually try to do it years ago. This was years ago. And oh man, just so much time. If you want to be your own IT administrator, don't expect to do anything else.
I totally understand. I mean, we're just running Hidden Gems is a full-time thing. I never have time to write anymore.
Right.
And I sort of in some ways look wistfully back at those times where all I was doing was writing.
Yeah, it's just a matter of priorities. Like sometimes you have to put more energy in with this thing and less energy in this thing. And that was my trade-off. That was how I managed to make time for myself to write. I have my own website, but for the serialization itself, I'm just going to let that sit on Ream.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's worked for you. So you're finding that you're able to, so like how many subscribers do you have? And like, do you find that they're, I don't know, the Ream platform, are they I guess they follow you and then they get updates about, the different books that you're working on?
Yeah.
And is there any discoverability towards other readers or
so
authors?
One of the reasons I went with Ream over other options that are out there is because it was started by writers, so who understand the industry. They're not just like Silicon Valley tech bros. No offense against bros, I love bros, but the tech bros are their own breed. And so Ream, I really felt invested in that they understood the industry. So yes, you. I'm sorry, I just think I distracted myself off of your question, but you were asking about like how people follow you and what kind of experience they're going to have.
And sort of what is there a discoverability to other authors?
Discoverability, thank you. That's where I wanted to get back on track. So they're still in very much the startup stage. They just launched discoverability, I think, not too long ago. They haven't made a huge announcement about it yet, but it's there because it was demanded by authors. Authors like, we want discoverability on this platform. And so the CEO and the tech guy went and built discoverability on the platform. So we'll see how discoverability works on Ream. It's pretty new. People can follow you for free if they want, just kind of like on any other social media platform type of deal. Like they hit follow and they're following you, and you can send messages to them through the community, or they can pay to belong to your community, one of your tiers. As authors, you can have really low tiers. I have like support my dog tier for $3 a month. Or you could go, I know some authors do like actual printed box sets that go out to their $25 to $50 tier, monthly tiers. And so it just depends on what you want to offer to the followers who are willing to pay you money and how much they're willing to pay. But
that sounds a lot like
is really
Kickstarter, right?
What?
That sounds a lot like the Kickstarter sort of model.
Yeah.
Where, you're having the different level of support means you get
it's exactly that.
Different rewards.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. They mimic that very much, but only instead of like an event, it's for monthly.
Right. And then I guess if you finish the book, you might lose those people. Like if you don't have, I guess that's why you kind of always want to have multiple projects. But if somebody was writing and then their project ended, all of a sudden there's no reason for people to be subscribing month by month.
Well, I think one thing that what you're seeing a lot of as a way to work around of that is a lot of people offering a lot of extras. So, for instance, they're offering character sheets, they're offering cutscenes, they're offering meta analysis of their own characters, and they're putting these things as only available to their members. In a lot of ways, similar to Patreon. Like if you just follow somebody on Patreon, you only get the free public posts. But if you pay, then you get all these extra things. And sure, an artist might finish a piece, but then you're going to be able to watch the real time, not the real time, but the sped up video of them making it, and that's going to be cool. So I'm going to keep supporting them because I want to see that. Not to mention, I think, and this is my opinion, but I think there's a big shift going on right now in working more towards building communities, of making people followers of the characters or followers of the writer, rather than just throwing out as many books as possible and hoping people buy them. So, for instance, I can only speak for myself, but I have 5 artists I support on Patreon, and I never look at the extras and bonuses. I just look at the comics that they're putting out, that they put out for everybody, but I want to support them. I want to make sure that comic keeps going. And if you don't know what I'm talking about Property of Hate by Sarah Jolly. Like, I want that thing to keep going. I love it so much. I will pay her every month, even if all I ever do is read that comic. And that's the kind of thing I want. I want people who want to pay me to keep my art and my creativity going, even if a story ends, because they know there's going to be another story, and they love my work. I honestly think if you want to see an example of this, look at the Victoria Goddard fandom for Hands of the Emperor. She has a Discord server, and the fans are ravenous. I mean, they just buy everything she writes. They're constantly talking to each other about the books and doing meta analysis, and just it blows me away, that particular fandom. And so that's what I want, and that's how you're going to engage people and keep people subscribing to you. If all you want to do is write a story and throw it out into the world, then I don't think subscription or serialization is for you. But if you're willing to invest and build a community around what you love and what you love to write, and write these stories, whether they're really long serials or whether they're just serialized novels, then serialization and subscriptions probably will work well for you.
Well, that is really good advice. Unfortunately, we're approaching the top of the hour, but that's probably quite a good stopping off point to wrap things up. So what a fascinating, I mean, I had not even considered the idea of serialization. I think it was so interesting how you brought in the very real fact that a lot of writers are frustrated with Amazon and are looking at alternatives to Amazon. And this is something that offers to it. So before we wrap things up, Craig, did you have any final thoughts or questions? And then we'll ask Kimboo to let us know where people who've enjoyed this podcast can find her.
No, I mean, I agree. It is fascinating, and although like we covered sort of like the I guess the more of the Radish model or whatever it was back, it was probably close to 2 years or year and a half ago when we talked about this. Obviously, things have really progressed a lot in that time. So for authors that haven't really considered it at all or haven't considered it since then, I think that this is really a different model to consider, because especially if they're sort of in that mode of pushing back against the Amazons and and all the other traditional bookstores, and the idea of creating their own author ecosystem that they can nurture and sort of as it builds, it really just benefits them more than the corporation. I think that's something that is going to resonate well with authors and our audience in general. So thanks for coming on.
Sure thing. And if any of your listeners are interested, I belong to a group on, Facebook. I know, but it's called Subscriptions for Authors. It is on Facebook. It's got, I think, almost 5,000 members now. There's a lot of talk and exploration about different platforms, different ways to do it, different styles of writing, different approaches, what to do if you've got chronic health issues and you can't put out a book every week, just a lot of discussion and dialogue on it. That's a Subscription for Authors group on Facebook. I'm a member, have been a member for a while. So if you're curious, I advise listeners to this podcast to go there and explore it a little bit.
Great.
Well, that is fantastic. And yes, and so yeah, we've got your website there. We'll pop a link down below.
Okay, great.
Everyone. And yeah, and if you have enjoyed listening to Kimboo share all this wisdom, make sure you go and check out her website, and make sure you leave a comment and let her know, and spread that love. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and click that like button and hit that bell notification. What a to-do list I'm giving you right now, but hopefully you've done some of these beforehand. But Kimboo, thank you so much for joining us. We have really enjoyed this chat. It's been really enlightening.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Craig. It's been a pleasure to be here and talking with you all about this, and I hope I get a chance to come back sometime soon. It's been fun.
Absolutely. And if you want to see Kimboo back, let us know in the comment section down below. But until then, we'll be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, cheerio.